Call the policy and procedure August meeting to order, please. Roll call.
Ms. Bourgeois?
Here.
Dr. Guillaume? Here. Mr. Bernard? Here. Mr. Boudery? Ms. Fertitta?
Here.
Mr. LaFont? Ms. Thomas?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We haven't had a policy and procedure meeting in a little while, a little minute, but today we're making up for it. We have lots of procedures. Some of them are very minor. Some of them will take a little longer. Forethought is our company that looks at the legislative actions and sees how does that affect our policies. And our staff looks at what they suggest, comes up with what should be put in the policy, and then we send it to our attorney's office to take the final docket and look at it and then send it back to us, and then we have to approve what they have done. So that's what we'll be doing tonight, approving the new policies or the little changes to the policies so that we can send it to the full board in September. So our first policy is A, to approve revisions to policy BH as presented by Superintendent Moore.
Yes, ma'am. Act 47 amended Louisiana Revised Statute 42-1119. The act added the requirement that if an immediate family member of a school board member or a superintendent is to be promoted to an administrative position, the family member must have been employed by the school board for at least 1 year. This became effective with Governor John Bel Everett's signature May 17, 2022. So the language change as seen on page 1, and then the additional verbiage on page 2 of 6 is now compliant with that change in state law.
I need a motion. Motion by Mr. Peter and seconded by Mr. Bernard. Is there any public comment or board comment?
Just one quick, whenever we see this, the immediate family members always confuses people, but that definition is given at the end of this particular act. And basically what it is his or her children, his or her brothers and sisters and their spouses, his parents. So that's the grandparents. If anybody's confused about that, look at the definitions at the end of the act. And the spouse.
Immediate family means different things for different policies.
Right, correct.
All right, any other comments? If not, we can vote. And motion passes unanimously. D is to approve revisions to policy DJE as presented by Ms. Tobias, purchasing agent.
The proposed revision to DJE purchasing policy is to update the language in the purchasing policy in accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 38-2271. The language competitive online solicitation has been replaced with the language reverse auction. Reverse auction means that a competitive online solicitation process on the internet for the purchase of equipment, supplies, or other materials or consulting services. The change became effective August of 22, and I conclude with stating that the policy has been reviewed and approved by the board's attorney, Ms. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Excuse me, I need a motion. Dr. Diop. And a second. Ms. Thomas. Any discussion by the public? Any questions or discussion by the board for Mr. Byers? If not, we can vote. And the vote is unanimous. Thank you. C, to approve revisions to policy DJED, bids and quotation, as presented by Ms. Jennifer Tobias.
The objectives for this proposed change, the revisions of DJED bids and quotations have been updated to reflect the increase in the bid law threshold for materials and supply purchases from $30,000 to $60,000. They're also doubling the threshold for services from $20,000 to $40,000. This change became effective August of 2022. And I also conclude that the stated changes and updates have been reviewed and approved by our board attorney, Mr. Patterson.
Oh, now we need a motion. Mr. Benoit, second. Ms. Thomas. Thank you. Any public comment? Board comment? Hearing none, we can vote. And the vote is unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to D. School bus scheduling and routing to approve revisions to policy EEE as presented by Mr. Toby Hubble, Transportation Supervisor.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Act 640 revised Louisiana Statute 17158. The act removes certain restrictions requiring the loading and unloading of students on shoulders of the roads when near their homes. The verbiage now states bus operators shall be prohibited from loading or unloading students at or near their homes while the bus is in a lane of traffic, unless the bus is in the lane furthest to the right side of the road, so that there is not a lane of traffic between the bus and the right side of the curb or other edge of the road.
I need a motion by Dr. Diaz, and a second by Mr. Kendall. Any discussion from the public?
Jamie Marple, 116 Sealess Lane, Lockport. Okay, so if I'm understanding what I was reading, it's basically saying the bus is just going to stay in its regular lane on the street. And if that's the case, I live on 308, and we have kids that get dropped off at private streets. And I guess my question is although this is good and the cars are behind it, are y'all going to make sure we have more patrol out there? Because I know we've watched and we've had to call, we end up not calling y'all, we call either the state police or local law enforcement to make sure that on those busier places and those busier places on the road that cars are not passing the buses, because they do. And especially on 1 and 308 is a very, very dangerous place. So I get, for the sake of argument, this is a good idea, but I want to make sure that we're safe all the way around and look at it from that perspective as well. So that was all I was just wanting to say, is that, because we have a problem with it on 308.
Thank you.
Let me ask, this normally deals with 4 lanes, right? Like in Galliana, just make sure. In other words, okay, I understand that. Basically what it is, you got a 4-lane road, you can't go across and you have to. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hubble. Also, in addition to that, at one point, thank you, we had cameras on those buses. Do we have any cameras on the outside of the buses in case someone should pass that bus out while that flag's out and you can take a picture of that car?
That's a great question. The cameras are on the inside of the bus to see what happens on the inside, but it does capture some outside of the windows, the one facing, not completely surrounding the outside. You'll see the exterior.
I think something we'll consider down the road in case that would happen, and you can take pictures and send that to the sheriff's office, because that could be a potential, death situation or mass situation.
I have questions. So the new ones that we purchased, they didn't have no like backup cameras or no cameras on us? Okay.
Not that kind of camera.
Also, monitor the buses as I'm headed to work in the mornings on 3235, because there's bus traffic there, to make sure that those cars are stopping on that left side of that, going up with 1335. You know, because there's always that tendency for them to want to pass, especially on south on 308, Highway 1, you know, towards the Louisville area. You know, you have bus stops, you go to that section, and they want to go around and pass up, which is
Yeah, no, and all the drivers, are instructed anytime that there's cars that are breaking the law, they usually write down if they can get the plate, and get it and report it to the sheriff.
those cameras may be something to consider down the road. Thank you.
A good suggestion, Mr. Archie, I was at a meeting, where they talked about speeding cars and passing up the buses and or for the bus driver to stop and take the picture and that kind of stuff. So that would be something to look at later, further down the road.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Stratton?
Well, Marty, but what is the penalty for running the stop sign with a school bus? Do you have any idea?
I have no clue. I'll find
That's
out.
something we could find out too.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Make it a little bit steeper, maybe they would, you know, those that are caught, spread the word.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we can vote. Vote is unanimous. On to E. AAA, Equal Opportunity Employment. To approve revisions to policy GAAA as presented by Mr. Barry Phillips, Director of Child Welfare.
Good evening. Policy GAAA has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 529 of the 2022 regular session. The Act prohibits discrimination based on natural, protective, or cultural hairstyle. Since this language was added to the anti-discrimination statutes, forethought recommends that it also is important to add this to policy GAAA, the Equal Opportunity Employment Policy. The revision to policy GAAA has been reviewed by our board attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance, and I recommend its approval for adoption.
Thank you. I need a motion. Dr. Diaz, seconded by Mr. Peters. Any public comment? Any board comment? I just want to say you will hear this little clause in a lot of the policies coming up that we have to add it to several policies. Hearing none, you may vote. And the vote is unanimous. F, UAMB, Employee Dress Code. To approve revisions to policy GAMB as presented by Mr. Cook.
Policy GAMB has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 529 of the 2022 regular session. The Act prohibits discrimination based on natural, protective, or cultural hairstyle. Since this language has been added to the anti-discrimination statutes, forethought recommends that it also is important to add this to the employee dress code policy GAMB, along with the definition. The revision to policy GAMB, employee dress code, has been reviewed by our board attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance and is in order. I recommend its approval for adoption.
I need a motion by Mr. Bernard. Second. Ms. Thomas. Is there any public comment? Board comment? Hearing none, we may vote. And the vote is unanimous. Move on to G. JAA, Equal Education Opportunities. This one? I'm sorry. It is education. To approve revisions to policy JAA as presented by Mr. Bill.
Policy JAAA has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 529 of the 2022 regular session. The Act prohibits discrimination based on natural, protective, or cultural hairstyles and took effect August 1st, 2022. The language is added to policy JAA. Policy JAA's revision has been reviewed by our board attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance. It is found to be in order. I recommend its approval for adoption by the board.
Thank you. I need a motion, Ms. Thomas, in a second. Mr. Peter. We have public comment or board comment.
Okay. Where it's listed, I don't know if this makes any difference, but under the agenda, JAA, equal education opportunities, but in the part that we talk about, it's equal employment opportunities.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Does that make a difference as well? Okay,
So the
thank you.
title is wrong, but the narrative inside of it is correct, so we
Correct.
should be.
Okay, that's what I have.
I was wondering why.
I see what you're
I
looking
know, but I was looking at this.
I
and
see
I'm
what
like,
you, yeah.
The file is just mistaken.
And that, that was what Michelle book didn't go through.
It didn't go through.
It is unanimous. All right, thank you. Moving on to H, JBD, student absences and excuses. To approve revisions to policy JBD as presented by Mr. Bill.
Policy JBD has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 472 of the 2022 regular session. The Act provides additional support for expectant and parenting mothers and fathers. Absences are required to be excused if related to pregnancy and parenting. Because the Act provides for excused absences, policy JBD, student absences and excuses, has been revised by forethought, as well as including a reference to the provision of the expectant and parenting students policy JQE. Policy JBD's revision has been reviewed by our board attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance and is in order. I recommend its approval for adoption by the board.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. I need a motion. Mr. Bernard, second by Dr. Dion. Any public comment? Any board comment? Bernard?
Yeah, in looking at this, it says we have to provide childcare within the school if available or outside the school system. Are we responsible for the monetary amount for that outside the school system as far as childcare is concerned? I'm just
What
looking
I
at this.
read, Mr. Bernard,
Yes,
was that
yes.
we are to provide the resources for them, not actually provide the child care.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Any other comment? Hearing none, you may vote. It is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to I. Bullying and hazing. To approve revisions to policy JCDAF as presented by Mr. Phillips.
Policy JCDAF has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 697 of the regular session of 2022. The Act requires each elementary and high school to institute a program to prohibit and prevent bullying. The Act defines bullying, requires employees and volunteers to be made aware of their responsibilities regarding bullying, and provides a reporting process, disciplining measures, remedies, and procedures for investigating and failure to act. The specifics of the program requirements and a new section on failure to act have been added to policy JCDAF. Policy JCDAF revisions by forethought have been reviewed by our attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance or in order. I recommend their approval for adoption.
Excuse me, I need a motion by Mr. Bernard, seconded by Dr. Diop. Any public comment? Any board comment? Hearing none, we may vote. Ms. J, mine is a little bit, thank you. Moving on to I, the dress code. Yes, it did that. To approve revisions to policy JCDAB presented by Mr. JC, I'm sorry. So there's two, JCDB is in the model list, but then JCDAB is in there, so it's no A. But just JCDB. Just right here.
Policy JCDB has been revised by forethought based on the passage of Act 529 of the regular session. The Act prohibits discrimination based on natural, protective, or cultural hairstyles. Although the language is added to the anti-discrimination statute, forethought feels that it is important to also address this in the student dress code policy. JCDB, where the definition has been included, the revisions to policy JCDB student dress code by forethought has been reviewed by our board attorney and Office of Child Welfare and Attendance in order. I recommend their approval for adoption.
Need a motion by Mr. Tudor, second by Dr. Diop. Any public comment? Board comment? We have a public comment? Yes, ma'am.
In the Marble 116, Sealis by Mock Court. You guys are putting this in here, and it talks about like braids. When the girls come to school with braids, sometimes there's color in them, and they are not natural colors. So how are we going to decipher and educate the public to know what is the difference and when to use it? Because the policy clearly states that for people that aren't having like braids, that have hair like mine, have to have natural colored or dyed colored hair. And for a mom that's going to go spend all that money on her child's hair to send her child to school to come home and be told that they can't have that because it doesn't follow the policy, I think a little more clarity on the direction of how we as parents are supposed to abide by the actual sitting policy with putting this in there. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I'm not understanding.
Yeah, I know you're
Okay,
saying there's
so
two different policies.
Under guidelines in this policy, it clearly states only natural occurring hair colors are allowed: black, brunette, auburn, or blonde, or natural or dyed. And sometimes when kids get braids, we've seen hot pink, we've seen green, we've seen other colors that are not allowed, that are not considered natural. So how are we to decipher what is considered what? So if there's clarity, because I would hate for a parent to go spend a lot of money on something and be told that it's not in accordance with the policy. So I guess I'm asking for more definition on the cultural side and what you guys are putting in, so we have a guideline as parents to make sure we're in accordance with sitting school board policy.
They have children come in and they dye their hair green and they dye their hair pink and blue. So that's where I'm not understanding.
Because it says right here in the guidelines for the policy.
What that says, and it says dyed hair. And they gave some
It
colors,
says natural,
maybe.
natural or dyed, so I'm assuming
Okay,
natural dyed hair.
As I said, dyed hair. And of course, natural. Cause I dyed my hair, I'm not naturally blonde.
That you're using a natural hair color.
There's no such thing as a natural hair color.
So people are born with blonde hair.
And I'm one of them. I'm one of them who's not born with blonde hair.
And I'm not naturally black either, but black hair is a natural hair color. Hot pink is not a natural hair color. That's why I'm saying, can we decipher it a little bit on how we're doing that, or do we just need to get a note saying, well, because my kid's, say, an indigenous person, he can wear his hair down to here and can do whatever his tribe did at that time. That's why I'm saying clarity, just direction. It doesn't have to be anything, just some direction.
If I could address just for a second. So the policy that's being changed is to stay compliant with state law. This is the specific language that the state passed as law. I don't think it runs counter to our existing policy that says hair should be also of a natural color. I think that we can recognize the state's law to uphold the values of all of our students and be compliant with our existing policy, which says that the hair also needs to be one of a natural occurring color, right? So just because you have, as an example, cornrows, if you dye each one of those cornrows a different color of the rainbow, you wouldn't be compliant with this or the state law because it's not a naturally occurring color.
That's what I was saying.
So the intent of our
clarity.
policy is to stay compliant with state law and recognize the cultural differences of all the students that exist in our school. I don't think the two run counter to each other. I think that layered on top of each other, we have a good policy that addresses all of those concerns.
I just wanted to make sure that that was it, because I would hate for, like I said, someone to go and spend a lot of money on something that, like I said, hot pink, and it's not okay. That was, and you explained it well. You answered exactly what I was saying, but I can't ask you that question straight up because I'm only supposed to be making a comment. So that was my question for clarity. But you answered it, so thank you.
So I think you've made a point in clarity. The same point when you're talking about hot pink and green and blue and some of those colors. You have clarified basically what you were asking.
I understand.
In other words,
it's not for me to say.
if it's green hair, then it's not of a natural hair color, so it will not be accepted. Is that what you're saying?
That is what number 2 says. That's what I'm understanding.
Again, like I think you answered your own question basically.
Correct, but I was asking for clarity. I don't sit on this board. You guys are my elected officials. You're the ones I'm supposed to come to get those answers. And that's why I was asking, because this is new. This is the time I can ask that question, because this is the only time I can speak. Well, I can ask a question, I can make a statement. And sometimes I make statements, sometimes I know the answer, and sometimes I know I'm telling you the wrong answer, sometimes just to get y'all to talk. Because I really enjoy watching y'all discuss it. And so this was a way to get that out there and understand it. And I also, not a lot of people understand that, and not a lot of people read the policy the way I do. And at the end of the day, I'm a mom and I have a budget. And so do all the other moms that are going to be spending money on their child's hair. And that was my major concern. So that was it. Thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Orchard?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to follow up, I can understand both sides, and maybe for one clarity down the road, we might need to revisit the wording or clarity for parents who are not as well versed on this or educated, or may go out and spend tons of money on this and have to be called into the office or sent home because of these reasons. That can happen. Maybe the teacher may misinterpret that policy. I'll call up here or whatever. So there's some validity to that discussion. Thank you.
Yes, this policy doesn't supersede what we already have. It just kind of commingles what we have. You still have to have the natural hair, and now you can do it in a cultural way.
And Madam Chairman, if I may add something, there was a minority student who went to a school in Louisiana with braids and was sent home. That's what promulgated this policy. Understandably so.
It is very expensive. Yes, sir, Mr.
I want to apologize for speaking without being recognized. Please
That's
forgive
okay.
me.
I'll give you a pass.
Slap. Thank you.
Comments? Hearing none, we can vote. Yes, passed. Moving on to K, JD, discipline, to approve revisions to policy JD, presented by Mr. Clerk.
Act 374 of the regular session provides for technical corrections and revisions of provisions of Title 17 of the Louisiana Revised Statutes. Among these technical changes were minor wording changes to Revised Statute 17416, discipline of students. These changes have been included by forethought in policy JD, discipline, and I recommend they are approved for adoption.
Thank you. I need a motion, Dr. Dion, and a second by Ms. Thomas. Any public comment? Any board comment? This is a case where it's just one little word we change.
I just wonder why they change must to shall.
Seems like it's the same thing.
It's not legally shall has a stronger implication that you must comply with it.
Shall comply with it.
No, that's
Right.
forgive the explanation, but that would be Pat's.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ron.
It's just a little stronger wording.
Yes.
Thank you. Any,
Yeah, the way it's spelled, that's really
we can vote if there's no other comment. And it does pass unanimously. Moving on to L, motion to approve revisions to policy JDE, as presented by Mr. Clerk.
Act 374 of the regular session provides for technical corrections and revisions of provisions of Title 17 of the Louisiana Revised Statute. Among these technical changes were minor wording changes to Revised Statute 17416, discipline of students. One of these changes has been included by forethought in policy JDE, expulsion, where the word must was changed to shall. I recommend this technical change for approval for adoption.
I need a motion by Mr. Bernard and seconded by Mr. Key. Any, comment from the public or the board? Here's another one that we're just changing must to shall. Hearing none, you may vote. And it does pass unanimous. Thank you. On to M, JM, student voter registration. This is a new policy. And it is to approve new policy JM as presented by Mr. Prodedure.
Policy JM, student voter registration, is a new policy developed by forethought based on the passage of Act 624 of the regular session. The Act requires that school boards provide an opportunity for each high school senior who is at least 17 years old to register to vote by using a high school computer to fill out an electronic voter registration application or by using the state mail voter registration application form. Policy JM, student voter registration, has been reviewed by our board attorney and the Office of Child Welfare and Attendant and is in order. I recommend its approval for adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I need a motion by Ms. Thomas, second by Dr. Diop. Any public comment?
When I first read, I'm sorry, 116 was fine. When I first read this, and it says new policy, I didn't know it was a law because it didn't say that in here. And it saddens me that happens. I would much rather see our state and our school districts do something like Rock the Vote by MTV to teach our kids more about civics and teach them how our government actually works and put efforts into doing that. So initially, I thought this was just a policy y'all were making and not something that was coming down to y'all to force to be done. Because I feel if someone wants to go vote, kids are smart enough to use smartphones, and we have Go Vote apps to register to vote. But again, like I said, I just wish the state would look at other ways to do and spend time to find a way for our kids to engage in government rather than just letting y'all go and register them to vote, where if their card changes in 6 months after they registered with y'all because they moved to another state to go to college or something else, then we're in another mess. So that was just basically my stance on this, so thank you.
Any board comment?
This is not forcing them. This says this is a opportunity for them to register, not forcing them to register. Am I correct?
That's correct. The verbiage says promoted information.
Thank you.
Just about the question and the comment about civics, State of Louisiana offers a full curriculum on teaching civics and how governments get involved and how the kids need to learn the legal system as well as the economic system and the actual three levels of government. I know that for a fact because I'm actually teaching the class. So there is a state curriculum.
If I remember correctly, I think our clerk of court does in fact in service our high school seniors and those of voting age, a particular type of assembly, to go over the ins and outs of voting and the right way to vote, and in fact actually set up many voting stages where they can actually go and practice that. So this is something that the schools have addressed, not only in the courses they take, but also in the actual application of the voting process.
I hope once they register that they actually go out and vote. Any other comment? Hearing none, you can vote. Thank you, Mr. Cole. On to N, JGC, Student Health Services, to approve revisions to policy JGC, Student Health Services, as presented by Ms. Daphne Jones, Director of Special Education.
So this revision is due to Act 562. And what the Act did was it allowed parents to submit their treatment plan through the physician for students with any seizure disorders. And it also has the Department of Education developing 2 courses of instruction on how to deal with children with seizure disorders, one for the nurses and one for the staff that actually are involved with working with children. And so that's the revision to this policy, and I would recommend it.
Need a motion by Mr. Peter, seconded by Ms. Thomas. Any public comment? Any board comment? None, we can vote. On to O, J, E, D, Administration of Medication, to approve revisions to policy JGC, Administration of Medication, as presented by Mr.
This is due to Act 315. What this act does is it allows the parents to request that an auto-injectable epinephrine pen can be put in a secure place in every one of the children's classrooms that they would go to if they cannot self-administer. And based on the need determined by the physician if they are extreme high risk anaphylactic reaction, capable of administering
I need a motion by Dr. Diaz, second by Mr. Peter. Any public comment? Any board comment?
And the parents do supply the injectable. Okay.
Yes.
Those are very expensive.
They're very expensive.
Yes, that was my concern. If they wanted to have one in every classroom, so a parent would have to have potentially 7 pens
It's extremely expensive. It also is an issue with insurance because typically you can only get 2 a year. And then we can't take the drug if it's expired. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I don't think they really thought out when they created that act. But this was all reviewed by our nursing staff as well. And that was one of the issues that came up. Yes, you can, but it's extremely expensive. Those pins can cost up to $2,000. Yes, and we make provisions for.
Any other comments? Dr. Dillon?
So, my question is not particularly to the change, but just, access of the students that can have a medication like an inhaler on their possession. I know oftentimes in the past, a couple of years back, we've had, not us directly, but some parishes have had some challenges with athletes in fall camp not having access to the inhaler in a timely fashion. I just don't want us to make that list. And so, what have we done to make, obviously, coaches, ADs aware that, again, in that instant, I know the changes were based on an epinephrine, self-administered pen. What are we doing to make sure that the staff is informed that every kid needs to have that available, but we also need to take into consideration that conditioning versus an asthma attack is two different things, and what are we doing to be able to identify the difference in that? Because again, my opinion has been is that the places that have gotten into trouble, they were trying to judge whether the player was out of condition or the player was actually having an asthma attack. And I think that judgment was, well, you're just out of condition, and thus that player got into trouble. And the window of opportunity to address an asthma attack closes quickly when you're not acted upon. And the further down in the cycle they are, that medication's typically not going to bring them back with other types of issues. So I'm questioning where we at with that, if you would.
Okay. I think your question brings up a lot of very valid concerns, and Louis got about 3 prongs that I think that we try to approach those concerns with. The first is when it has medication on campus that we're going to administer in the event of emergency. We have to do a very good job of alerting all people that come into contact with that kid, not just as math teacher, but the football coaching staff about the condition. Second, I'm very happy that we have athletic trainers that work with our teams that are doing that kind of physical activity, because athletic trainers have a level of experience and knowledge to assess and clearly see the difference between what you described and being out of condition. And third, I know from personal experience, I've got a kid that has to carry an EpiPen. And already at 12 years old, the doctor was saying this kid needs to be a self-carry. So that the medication is on the child. And as soon as they're able to become somebody who can administer whether it's an asthma pump or epinephrine pen because they're having some allergic reaction to whatever they're allergic to, that's the first line of defense as described to me by our physicians as being the difference between an ambulance ride or something worse. And so I would default to Ms. Jones to add on to that anything that I missed.
We develop our health plan, so that is all shared with all that work with that particular child. In fact, in the first we talked about the seizure disorder. We've already put that in place. We use safe schools for that, so we train everyone. All of the coaches receive first aid and CPR training in the district, and then we do have nurses on staff that work closely with all the staff, the trainers, the coaches, and everybody else. We're also talking about, and I'm going to do a proposal about extending some of the nurses' care, especially in the summer, because we have some issues. So I have a proposal actually in my emails right now. Yeah. I'm going to share with him, but it's bigger than me. And so those are some of the things that we are looking at because we know it's an issue. And as we move forward, we really just want to make sure all our kids are protected. But we do have those things in place. And we have access to that, through the J campus. That is all on the school's record. So it's easily accessible to everyone, but we do make sure that everyone who deals with those children know what the needs are. And when they do self-carry, one of the things that we have to make sure of that everybody knows where it is. Because if you're in a dance competition on a football field and you're self-carry, you don't want it left in the locker room. So those are things that we try to recheck and check.
So if I may, so just a suggestion. So we can't have an athletic trainer at every event, so we know that. Can we make it a point to have the head coach designate a coach that's responsible for that child that has a self-administered medication available? So that way, again, they're alerted in that. And I realize it's not part of policy or what we're talking about. We're talking about a practice, but I think we would be better served by identifying that and having a coach. And if that coach is not there, then the head coach is responsible for identifying what's going on with that athlete.
I'll definitely bring that to the district athletic director, and we can come up with a practice that everybody's comfortable with to make sure that, aside from what's in policy, we have a practice in place. Common sense.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
That is, reminds me of the drowning awareness thing, but Masters, you have to designate somebody to watch, because if everybody's watching, nobody's watching. So you have one person that's doing that. Yes.
I would ask you to please include band, cheer, everybody.
Yeah.
Because in years past, we had a mother that if she wasn't there at the night performances for her child in band to administer that, because if something happened with the night air and it just caused the child to need done. So without the parent being there, because the child wasn't allowed to carry it.
And we are reviewing and looking at who is actually medicine trained in the district. So that's part of that proposal that we're going to discuss, because we really want to lay all of that out and have that communication between trainers and athletic staff as well as the clubs too, because we don't want anybody to not know, and it's important. And sometimes the kids don't share. I mean, we wish they would all the time, but sometimes that gets missed too. We know they need an inhaler, but so it's about communication, and that's what we're going to try to improve.
Last thing you want to hear is, I left my inhaler on the bus.
Yeah.
At a performance
Yeah.
or at an event.
At an event, correct.
Yes, sir. Adams?
It's my understanding that the individuals that are going to be administering these injections have to go to in training.
Medicine, yes, sir. We medicine training.
All of the people who come into contact with this child during the course of the day.
If you had the
in that
pen in
particular
whatever
classroom,
situation that they were in.
So these people will be trained on how to administer this injection. Thank you.
You have a comment? Any other comments? And then we can vote. And it does pass the motion. And P, JQE, expectant and parenting students. To approve revisions to policy JQE presented by Ms. Jones.
So that's dealing with the Act 472, and Mr. Phillips already spoke to you about the excused and unexcused absences. So I get the second part of that, and the Act also requires high schools to provide accommodations for breastfeeding mothers and to inform parenting students about the availability of child care within schools and, if available, outside of the schools. So we would just share that information with them of what would be available and connect them to the right source.
While they are expressing milk,
They have to have a
private
private,
place,
yes,
private
private
place,
place.
and also allowed to make up in work.
That is correct.
I need a motion by Mr. Bernard, seconded by Ms. Thomas. Any public comment? Any board comment? Hearing none, you can vote. It does pass unanimously. Thank you all. No other comments. This meeting is adjourned.